This lesson we were evaluating the usefulness of observations in researching society. So looking at the two images above, we considered how we would best research them. We thought about perhaps trying to join their gangs or their groups, wearing the same clothes, identifying with them, maybe adopting their attitudes and behaviours and values, supporting the things that they support, and so on. Probably the easiest way to find out would be to go and interview them. However, becoming part of their group and their population would give us a better insight into how they behave and why they behave in the way that they do. So we'll know different observational techniques today. We'll explain them, use examples of research, and we'll evaluate them to show how useful they are using PetVorg. So thinking about some of these questions here, which gang would be the easiest to access, which methods would you use, how would you go about studying them, and what's the best kind of person to study each group? So you'd probably need to be white British to study the football fans, maybe wearing an England top. Just looking at the group there, you'd probably fit in best in that way. With the Hells Angels, you'd probably need to be a man, right? Maybe in your 50s, with a bike, knowing how to ride it, wearing all this kind of gear that they're wearing too. Perhaps sporting some kind of beard as well by the look of it. So how involved should you be in an observation? So observing someone is literally watching them. You can be involved or not involved, and we'll talk about that now. So observation, it must occur in the field. It's got to be in a natural setting, otherwise it's not really valid. So a natural setting or the field could be a classroom, it could be a place of work, playground, it could be a canteen or an office space, a bus stop or a train. And it can be covert or overt. Remember, covert means undercover, so they don't know that you're observing them, or overt means you're open, you're letting them know that you're there. Covert researchers become part of the group and that they intend to research, and they can do that by participating, by being one of the group, or they can be an observer from the outside. So if you're watching behaviour in a playground, you might sit yourself on a bench and see what's going on around you. You might watch from a place where it looks like you're part of the group, but you're not actually doing anything or taking a lead role. Overt will be clear about their intentions and spend time as an observer within the group. So they would say why they're there, what they're doing, and it would be clear that they're actually observing this particular group. And there are pros and cons of both of these methods. With covert, you might not become part of the group, so you might actually stand in a hidden place where people can't see that you're there, but again, they still don't know why you're there. But there's lots of benefits for both of them. In both instances, researchers must ensure they mustn't disrupt the everyday patterns in behaviour that they're trying to research. So if you're participating undercover using covert methods, you need to make sure that you're not leading behaviour in any way. You need to get a good vantage point where you can really see what's going on and why, and certainly not take leadership roles so you're not affecting the behaviour of the group. There's lots of studies that have been conducted that use observation in different ways, and we're going to talk through them briefly. We've looked at these in the lesson, but I'd like to reiterate them now. Very briefly then, Eileen Barker in 1984 did a study called The Making of the Moonie, Choice or Brainwashing. Basically, the Unification Church had a group of members called the Moonies, and there'd been like a moral panic in the media saying that everyone that had joined had been brainwashed. So she decided to spend a very long time observing these people in an overt way to find out what was going on. She also used interviews as well as her observations, and they knew exactly why she was there. She spent 7 years doing her study, so many people said she had gone native, so she had become one of the Moonies, and her findings were that they weren't in fact brainwashed, they just wanted to be part of a communal activity and facility. She said she was a passive observer initially, but then she became an active observer. So passive, just kind of not participating, then active, actually participating in the group. It actually took a really long time to get through the gatekeepers. People did not want her to be part of the Unification Church because they felt that she would impose on their private lives. So the gatekeepers were quite strong, making this quite a practically difficult research piece. And so her findings were, as I said before, that she felt that people were not being manipulated. It's difficult to know how valid that is because obviously she became part of this particular society. So she did overt participant observation. Lord Humphrey's another really interesting study done in the 1970s called the tea room trade. So he was actually observing the behaviour of male to male, so homosexual encounters in public toilets. And it's called the tea room trade because of the slang that's been used against to describe activities of homosexual men. He wanted to find out about different behaviour, who was involved in these behaviours, and so he embedded himself in the group as a lookout, or known as a voyeur, to gain their trust. So he would be someone who was observing and making sure that no one was going to come in and interrupt the activity in these public toilets. Once they left the action, Lord Humphreys took the number plate of the people that were leaving and then traced them back to their homes. Once he'd gone back to their homes, he wanted to find out about their personal lives, and many had wives at the addresses. And his findings were that there was an incongruence between your private life and your public life, certainly in engaging in homosexual activity, which was certainly seen as very deviant at the time, in some places illegal. There were lots of ethical issues here in terms of him deceiving the people he was observing. So he was a covert participant observer. He didn't get consent from people. He followed them home, so he found them even more information about them, and he also interviewed the men in their own homes under false pretenses, so he deceived them too. A very, very long study, very, very practical, very impractical, and very, very unethical. Again, a covert participant observation. We then have James Patrick, who also used covert participant observation. He managed to access a gang in Glasgow through one of his students. Some ethical issues there. He's used a pseudonym to protect himself, as actually he was part of this gang and was party to illegal activities which could put him and also him in trouble, and also the gang wouldn't be particularly happy that they'd been observed in this covert way. He was involved in some quite illegal activities, as I say, and many of the times he saw behaviour that was fueled by what he described as fear and aggression. He found out a lot about the behaviours and often unsuspecting victims of attacks during the gang. And he also talked about why and what drove them and what the outcomes were for this behaviour. Very dangerous for him to participate in. Accidentally swallowed some drugs during the participating. He was trying to become part of them in such a big way that he ended up putting himself in danger. And he also put members of the public in danger too through the actions that he witnessed. So again, a covert participant observation. Paul Willis used overt non-participant observation. He also triangulated using other methods too, but he was looking at the lads and the response of working class boys within schools. There were two groups, the lads and the year-olds. So the lads would go against what Bowles and Gintis had called the correspondence theory, in that they weren't preparing for work, they were actually making the most of the time they had of freedom whilst they were at school before they went and did some menial jobs in the future, where they would bully the middle class academic boys, calling them the year-olds, but ultimately those year-olds would be the people who would be managing them in the future. He interviewed them as well. He spent time doing like unstructured focus groups too, as well as observing their everyday activities. So this is an example of an overt, both participant and non-participant, more non-participant observation of boys within school. So key problems to consider briefly. You need to make sure that you're involved, but also remain detached to make sure that you're objective. So that should say but, not by. Going native can occur when you become too engrossed in the research. You shouldn't become too close because you'll stop seeing what you're studying. If you're not close enough, then you won't know what's going on. White said that about the dangers from becoming a non-participant observer to a non-observing participant, which it explains itself. And also leaving the study can be a problem. So you've become attached to these people, they've become attached to you, and then you suddenly are out of their lives. It can be difficult for both and also can cause harm. There's also something that doesn't occur on this slide, and it talks about Verstehen. So the idea that you are gaining true empathy with these people, that's what Verstehen means. And that is the best way of getting a clear insight into people's lives, to gain Verstehen.